You want to influence the world? Then hush. Quiet the noise inside that demands to be heard, admired, validated. Because the truth is, no one is moved by the loudest voice in the room. They are moved by the soul that understands them without needing to speak. Influence begins not with speaking, but with presence. And presence begins not with charisma, but with the courage to listen deeply, without interruption, without crafting your reply, while the other person is still unveiling their truth. Real influence is the silent gravity of attention, and people can feel it when they are truly heard. It is rarer than gold in this world. You cannot change hearts by controlling them. You change hearts by seeing them, by meeting people where they are, not where your ego demands them to be. You think wisdom is about how much you know. No, wisdom is how much space you make for another person to exist without fear. We have made listening a lost art. In a world full of shouting, people are starving for silence that understands. The truth is, most people do not want advice. They want a witness, someone to hold their pain, not solve it. And you, yes, you have that power, but only if you stop trying to impress and start trying to connect. Dale Carnegie said it best. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than in 2 years trying to get them interested in you. Why? Because people do not remember the facts you share. They remember the feeling you gave them. They remember the warmth of being heard. Listening is not weakness. It is strength under control. It is restraint in a world of reaction. And it takes power to silence your own noise long enough to feel someone else's signal. Never forget this. Those who refuse to listen are ruled by their own insecurity. They talk over others to drown out the voice inside that says you are not enough. But the truly powerful, they lean in, they look someone in the eyes, and they say without words, I see you. Influence is not domination. It is resonance. You cannot create harmony with another if you do not know the key they're playing in. You cannot change a life unless you know the rhythm of their pain, and you'll never know it if all you care about is how you sound instead of how they feel. Listen not with your ears, but with your soul. Pick up on what's not being said, the tremble in their voice, the pause that hides a wound, the silence that screams for understanding. To influence someone, you must make them feel safe in their truth, not judged, not fixed, just known. You want to be unforgettable? Then learn this sacred art. Make people feel seen. Because here's the truth. Nobody forgets the one who listened when the world walked past. Nobody forgets the one who said, your story matters, not with words, but with stillness, eye contact, and presence. And beware, those who speak endlessly about others are often the ones who've never looked within. Never trust the people who tell you other people's secrets. They whisper poison and call it connection. But it's not connection, it's corrosion. Real influence is clean. It does not manipulate, it elevates. It does not take, it gives. And it all starts with listening, not selectively, not strategically, but sincerely. You want to master the room? Then master your silence. You want to rise in life? Then kneel in humility and say, teach me who you are. Listening is love without agenda. It is the bridge between souls that words alone could never build. The greatest power is not in your speech, but in your restraint. It's not in your knowledge, but in your openness. It's not in being right, but in being present. Every time you resist the urge to interrupt, you free someone to become more of who they are. Every time you choose curiosity over control, you build invisible trust. Every time you stop trying to whine and start trying to understand, you rise. We were not born to impress one another. We were born to awaken one another. And the first spark of awakening is listening. The broken man yells to be heard. The healed man listens to heal. And in that silence, miracles happen. Walls fall, masks slip, and for a fleeting moment, two souls meet in the middle unarmed. That is influence. Influence is not when people do what you say. It's when they feel changed in your presence without even knowing why. Because something about you didn't try to control them. You saw them. And when someone feels seen, they begin to see themselves. So next time you're in a conversation, ask yourself, are you listening to respond or listening to reveal? Are you trying to prove who you are or learn who they are? People open up, not when you show how strong you are, but when you show how safe they are. Drop your need to be impressive. Pick up the sacred duty of being fully with someone. You'll be amazed what people tell you when they feel no pressure to perform. And you'll be even more amazed at who you become when you finally stop talking long enough to hear the whispers of life. Because life is always speaking, but only the quiet know how to hear it. Most people are screaming into the void, praying someone hears them. But the void never answers only. Presence does. Not the kind of presence that waits to speak, but the kind that waits to understand. And in that stillness, something sacred unfolds. People remember who they are when they are not trying to survive the noise. To listen is to love in silence. To truly listen is to hold space without needing to fill it. It is to say, you don't have to prove yourself here. I'm not trying to fix you. I'm here to feel you. And that is rare. That is holy. That is unforgettable. Real communication is not the exchange of words, it is the exchange of awareness. You think people are difficult to understand? No, they are simply not used to being understood. Speak to their defenses, and they will harden. Listen to their soul, and they will soften. Influence does not shout across a chasm, it builds a bridge. One made of attention, patience, and care. And every time you pause your own agenda to tune into someone else's story, you become the architect of connection. Because the loudest message is never spoken, it is felt. If you truly want to change someone's mind, start by making them feel safe. A closed heart won't open through argument, it opens through acknowledgement. You do not need to agree to understand. You only need to respect the humanity in front of you. And if you cannot do that, if your ego insists on winning, proving, dominating, then understand this. You have already lost the person, even if you win the point. Listening is the most radical form of generosity. You give someone back to themselves by allowing them to unfold, uninterrupted. It is not weakness to listen, it is strength at rest, a quiet confidence that knows. The one who understands does not need to control. You think the powerful man is the one who speaks with thunder, but the real power lies in the one who listens like the sky wide, still, accepting. People don't open up to the loud, they open up to the calm, because in calm there is safety. And in safety, there is truth. The ones who can't stop talking are often the ones who fear silence, because silence reveals what we hide. But only when we sit in that silence, only when we listen without escaping, do we discover what's real. Never underestimate what you heal in someone just by listening. You may be the first person who made them feel like they didn't have to fight to be heard. That's not a small thing. That's a soul-deep thing. That's legacy. And maybe you were never meant to give the perfect advice. Maybe you were just meant to be the one who finally listened, who didn't interrupt, who didn't judge, who simply sat and held space. That alone can change a life. That alone can save a soul. So stop performing and start perceiving. Stop reacting and start receiving. Let their words wash over you like waves. Let their pauses speak louder than their sentences. Let your attention become the medicine they didn't know they needed. You cannot influence what you do not understand, and you cannot understand what you do not listen to. This is not about being nice, it's about being real. And being real means getting quiet enough to hear what truly matters. Some people only listen for gaps to insert themselves, but you listen for truth, listen for pain, listen for hope, trying to breathe beneath the weight of someone's story. Your influence will never come from how loudly you speak, but from how deeply you feel. Because the world doesn't need another voice shouting into the chaos. It needs people who carry peace in their presence. People who turn down the volume of their ego and tune into the frequency of the human heart. And if you can be that personif, you can become the one who listens without agenda, who hears without judgment. You won't just influence others, you will heal them. And when you heal others, you heal yourself. Because every time you make space for someone else to be fully seen, you remind the universe, I am not here to dominate, I am here to connect. I am not here to be right, I am here to be real. I am not here to impress, I am here to understand. So if you truly want to influence this world, remember this: the greatest communicators are not the best talkers, they are the best listeners. And they listen not with their ears, but with their hearts wide open. Most people don't even know the weight they carry until someone listens with enough stillness to lift it. It's not your advice that lightens them, it's your attention. It's your willingness to step aside and let their truth take up space, even if it's messy, even if it's not what you expected. Especially then, because that's when influence becomes sacred. When you stop trying to shape someone and start allowing them to unfold in front of you, like a rose blooming in a field of noise, desperate for sunlight, desperate to feel seen without being edited. And that's the tragedy of most relationships too. Many try to fix the flower without tending to the soil. They talk at each other, not with each other. They speak to defend, to posture, to escape silence. But no soul has ever been nurtured by noise. Only by presence, only by care. Listening isn't just something you do with your ears. It's something you become. A listener is a mirror that does not distort. A listener is a refuge, not a reaction. And when someone finds that rare shelter in you, their mask begins to fall, not because you demanded it, but because your silence gave them permission. That is power. Quiet, transformative power. And yet, most people miss it. They think influence is about domination, about persuasion, about charisma. But influence, real influence, is when someone leaves your presence and feels more like themselves, not less. Influence is when your humility allows another's truth to rise. Don't be the one who always has something to say. Be the one who has the strength to say nothing and mean everything. Because here's the raw truth. If you can't listen to another, it's not because they're unworthy, it's because your ego is too loud, and ego builds walls. But empathy builds bridges. One isolates, the other unites. You must choose, and your choice will shape your legacy. Legacy is not made in public applause. It is made in private moments when you look someone in the eyes and made them feel that their pain, their joy, their confusion mattered. Not because you had the answers, but because you stayed with them long enough to help them find their own. It's easy to be present when things are pleasant, but the real test is whether you can stay grounded when someone else is unraveling. Can you hold your tongue when someone's truth doesn't align with your narrative? Can you offer patience when your pride wants to preach? That is mastery. That is influence. And that is love, not the kind of love that flatters, but the kind that frees. When you listen, you become a channel for healing, not through your brilliance, but through your stillness, through your willingness to make someone else feel safe enough to be honest. And in a world full of performance, that kind of honesty is sacred. But here's the paradox. You cannot offer that kind of presence to others until you've first offered it to yourself, until you've sat with your own pain without distraction, until you've listened to the parts of yourself you'd rather silence. Because when you learn to listen to your own soul, you become infinitely more equipped to hold space for the soul of another. So start there. Sit in your silence. Feel what you feel. Ask yourself, where have I refused to listen? Not just to others, but to my own needs, my own truth, my own intuition. Because the one who listens to themselves learns to listen to life. And life speaks not always in language, but in energy, in signs, in feelings, in stillness. And if you don't slow down, if you don't listen, you'll miss it. You'll miss the people who were trying to open up to you. You'll miss the love that wasn't loud. You'll miss the lessons that didn't come in words, but in presence. You'll miss the chance to influence not by control, but by compassion. And someday, when all the talking is done, you'll look back and realize it wasn't your clever words that changed people. It was the quiet moments where you gave someone the dignity of your full attention. And that was the moment they bloomed. So many walk through this life starving for something they can't name. It isn't more information. It isn't more advice. It isn't more voices telling them who to be. What they are starving for, what every soul aches for, is witnessing. The sacred act of being noticed without judgment, understood without interruption, loved without performance. That is what a listener gives. And that is why listening, true listening, is an act of profound rebellion in a world obsessed with broadcasting. You cannot fake it. People know when you're waiting to speak instead of opening to receive. They can feel the difference between being tolerated and being treasured. They know when your eyes are scanning for a reply instead of resting gently on their humanity. And here's what most never understand. Influence is not a moment, it is a presence. It is the slow building of trust, brick by brick, through gestures so small they seem invisible. The pause, the nod, the silence that says, "Go on, I'm with you." These are the quiet things that shape lives. Not the performance of empathy, but the practice of it. To be heard is to be healed, and to offer that space to another is to become the medicine this noisy world has forgotten. And yet there are people who will never understand this, who will never lean in, never quiet themselves, never offer their gaze as an open door. They talk because silence terrifies them. They argue because stillness would show them who they really are. They dominate conversations because deep down, they don't believe their presence is enough. But you, if you're willing, can be different. You can become the kind of soul who brings peace without needing to perform. You can walk into a room and speak nothing, but your stillness will speak volumes. Not because you silenced yourself, but because you chose to be fully present. And presence is power, not loud power, not controlling power, but the kind of power that moves beneath the surfaces, subtle, sacred, undeniable. That's what draws people to you, not your resume, not your charm, but your capacity to see without judging, to listen without fixing, to love without asking them to be anything other than who they are. And yes, this takes courage. It takes courage to let go of the urge to be impressive. It takes courage to sit with someone's pain without wrapping it up in a neat little lesson. It takes courage to say, "I don't have the answer, but I'm not leaving." And that is what people remember. Not your brilliance, not your achievements, not even your words, but your presence. The feeling they had when they were near you, that they didn't have to shrink to fit your understanding, that they didn't have to hide to be accepted, that for one rare moment, they could just be. That's how you influence. You create space. And the bigger your space, the more people rise inside it. But you cannot offer that kind of space if your inner world is cluttered with the noise of needing to be heard. So clean the inside. Learn to sit in silence without squirming. Learn to hear someone else's sorrow without needing to translate it into your own. Learn to hold discomfort without shutting down, because that's what separates those who perform empathy from those who live it. Empathy does not say, "I know what you're going through." It says, "I don't know, but I'm willing to walk with you anyway." And sometimes that walk is the greatest gift you can give. Sometimes silence is the most generous sound. Sometimes not responding is the deepest form of respect. Let people finish their sentences. Let them find the words without your guidance. Let them pause and struggle and return to the truth in their own time. Your job is not to lead them. Your job is to stay. And when you stay, when you refuse to run from someone's truth, you give them the courage to face it themselves. That's the miracle of listening. It doesn't solve pain, it sanctifies it. It doesn't erase stories, it honors them. And in a world that rushes, ignores, interrupts, and erases, what could be more powerful than that? And yet, so few ever learn this. Because true listening requires the death of the ego. It asks you to set aside the part of yourself that wants to be admired, validated, or applauded. It demands that you stop chasing the spotlight and become the warmth in someone else's shadow. It's easy to talk, but to be silent with purpose, with grace that is rare, that is divine. And that is why those who master it are unforgettable. You see, there is a kind of presence that feels like home. Not the home with walls and windows, but the home you carry in your chest when someone sees you and doesn't flinch. When someone hears your tremble and doesn't correct your tone. When someone holds your anger, your sadness, your raw truth and stays. That is the kind of presence the world needs more of. That is the kind of presence you can become. But it begins when you stop trying to influence people and start understanding them. Influence is not about bending others to your will. It's about opening the door so they can walk more freely into their own. You cannot do that if you are obsessed with being right. You cannot do that if your identity is wrapped up in being the smartest, the wisest, the one with all the answers. Because answers are cheap, but presence is priceless. A moment of sincere listening can do what a lifetime of advice never could. It can melt the armor someone has worn since childhood. It can dissolve the walls they built out of fear. It can awaken the light inside them that no compliment ever reached. And yes, it takes effort. Yes, it requires humility, but it's worth it. Because when you become that person, when you carry the energy of one who listens without needing anything in return, you become magnetic. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are. You become a safe haven in a world of storms, a pause in the rush, a breath in the noise. And the people around you will feel it. Even if they don't know how to say it, they will sense something different in your presence. Something calming, something real. Because real influence has nothing to prove. It simply is. It listens. It observes. It understands. And in understanding, it transforms. So ask yourself, how many lives have you missed because you were too busy talking? How many hearts passed by you, unheard, because you couldn't sit still long enough to feel them? Let this be the moment you decide to change that. Let this be the moment you reclaim the forgotten power of your silence. Because when you finally listen not just with your ears, but with your soul, you begin to see people, not their performances, not their defenses, but their truth. And in that seeing, in that honoring, in that stillness, something miraculous happens. They start to see you, too. Not the version you perform, not the mask you wear, but the deeper self, the one who is strong enough to be soft, the one who influences, not by volume, but by depth. So, if you wish to rise, sink first. Sink into presence. Sink into silence. Sink into the sacred art of listening, not just as a technique, but as a way of being. Because in the end, you cannot influence the world if you refuse to hear its heartbeat. And you cannot reach a soul you refuse to meet in stillness. Be the one who listens, and you'll be the one they never forget. Be the one who listens not to reply, not to impress, not to seem wise, but to receive. To receive the sacred offering of someone's unguarded truth. And when they hand it to your awe-trembling, imperfect, hold it with reverence, as if you're holding something ancient, because you are. You're holding the voice of a soul that forgot it mattered. And in your silence, it remembers. Most people have never been really heard in their entire life. Not by their parents, not by their friends, not by their lovers. Because most people listen to confirm their own story, not to understand someone else's. They listen for openings, not meanings, for defense, not depth. But you, if you choose, can become a rare and powerful exception. You can become the one who listens with such quiet conviction. Others fall into truth around you. You can become the one who listens with such patience. People begin to unravel their masks without even realizing it. You can become the one whose silence doesn't suppress, it awakens. Because when you listen without interruption, people stop editing themselves. And in that freedom, they rediscover pieces of who they are that they'd long buried under the need to be accepted. That's what makes you unforgettable, not the brilliance of your words, but the purity of your presence. And yes, there will be moments where your pride screams for recognition. There will be times your ego aches to be the center. But let it ache, let it rise, and then let it go. Because the deeper power is not in the one who commands the room, but in the one who holds it. The one who makes the room feel safer simply by being in it. And that's who you're becoming. Not a speaker of noise, but a conductor of presence. Because when you listen long enough, deep enough, you begin to hear more than words. You hear the wound beneath the laughter, the hesitation behind the confidence, the fear woven into the anger. You begin to hear the parts of people they don't yet know how to express. And once you can hear those places, you can touch them. Not with advice, not with solutions, but with something far more healing, understanding. And that is the rarest gift of all. Because when someone feels truly understood, they don't need to be convinced. They don't need to be persuaded. They don't need to be saved. They begin to heal themselves. Not because you told them who to be, but because you reflected who they already are. So let others talk. Let them rush to be heard. Let them fill the air with noise. You be the stillness. Be the one who doesn't flinch in silence. Be the one who makes others feel safe to fall apart without fear. Be the one who knows. The deeper the listening, the deeper the transformation. Because the soul doesn't respond to volume, it responds to presence. The heart doesn't open for power, it opens for peace. And the truth doesn't need to be shouted, it only needs a space quiet enough to be heard. So become that space. Empty yourself of urgency. Strip away your need to dominate. Let your words be few and your attention infinite. Because at the end of your life, it won't be the things you said that define your legacy. It will be the moments you made others feel understood. And in that understanding, you will have influenced not just minds but hearts. Not just actions, but souls. That is influence. That is greatness. That is love, disguised as silence. And isn't that what we're all truly aching for? Not to be admired, not to be followed, but to be felt. To be held in someone's quiet attention long enough to remember we are still human beneath the armor, still worthy beneath the shame, still sacred beneath the noise. This is what most forget. The loudest person in the room may command attention, but the quietest one often shifts the atmosphere. Because presence is not passive, it is power in its purest form. A calm, Steady presence says, I do not need to overpower you. I am already rooted in who I am. I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to understand you. And when you radiate that stillness, without effort, without pretense, people begin to put down their shields. Not because you ask them to, but because they finally feel safe. And safety is the seedbed of transformation. You can't force a soul to bloom. You can only hold the light long enough for it to choose the sun. When you listen not to fix, not to gain, but to witness, you become that light. You become the gentle warmth in a cold world. You become the stillness that breaks through the chaos. And people feel it. They don't always say it, but they remember. Because there's something unforgettable about being deeply heard. It's a kind of intimacy most never experience in intimacy, not of the body, but of attention. A kind of sacredness not tied to romance, but to reverence. The reverence of being met without agenda. And you don't have to be perfect to give this. You only have to be present. You only have to slow down enough to let go of your script and start reading theirs. Because when you do, you realize every person is a walking novel of unspoken truths, highlighted regrets, crossed out dreams, and chapters they've never dared to share aloud. And your job is not to rewrite their story. Your job is to hold the page still while they remember how to read it again. You don't need to be profound. You don't need to be wise. You only need to be there, not half there, not distracted, not waiting for your turn. Fully, quietly, there. Because when you are, something eternal opens between two souls, and in that space lives change. Not from force, not from noise, but from presence. So if you truly want to influence the world, don't speak more clearly. Listen more deeply. Don't raise your voice. Lower your defenses. Don't try to be the hero. Be the witness. Because when you stop trying to be important, you become impactful. And when you stop trying to be heard, you finally begin to hear. And when you hear with your heart, you awaken something in others that no volume could ever reach. That is how you influence. Through stillness, through sincerity, through soul. So be still, be sincere, and become the kind of presence that teaches the world how to listen again, not by instruction, but by example. Because in the end, you cannot influence what you refuse to hear, and you cannot reach the hearts of others until you've made peace with the silence within your own. Let the world be loud. You deep, and watch the world shift